Hey, everybody, this is Barry Mankin here with the Holistic Home Health Podcast. We're coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee, here at a studio, and we wanted to talk to you about real estate transactions, health in the home as it relates to real estate transactions. We've touched on this in different podcasts before, but we just had an interview here with Millie Hoffman, and that episode will be dropping, I think, in a couple of weeks. But we try to schedule these out, a few weeks ahead of time. But coming off the just doing that interview, this jarred some stuff in me because we have so many situations that come up every week that involve real estate. And I wanted to give you a hypothetical that may or may not be related to one I just did last week, or a couple that I did last week that relates to Millie's story, but in some cases, it's a worse scenario. So this is how this happens. And again, I'll preface this by saying, if you're in the market for a house, and especially if you're coming from out of town, there's so much anxiety, there's so much fear that's associated with this process that it's hard to know who to trust. And so, at least when you're coming to town here, give Four Corners Environmental or Four Corners Home Inspections a call. We have a good network of people here, so it's a shameless plug. But I want to bring transparency to the process and the tension that happens here to say you have to look at things outside of just your narrow perspective of, I just want to, if you're the buyer, I just want to buy a house that's good and that's not going to give me problems. If you're the agent, I want to make sure that I have a good network of people around me so I can trust and be transparent. And if you're coming in from the insurance perspective, you want to make sure that actually you don't have a claim to deal with. So we need to bring transparency to these homes. It doesn't typically happen on the front end. And we can't know everything. Nobody's perfect with this process, but I believe that we've got some gaps in the industries, especially with crossover as it relates to environmental concerns. And so if I can help with that process a little bit, I want to at least be able to talk about how these things happen and then maybe give some solutions as far as getting a good network of people that are qualified around you. So I'll just say a hypothetical. This, imagine that you're coming from out of the country or out of state. You're coming to a different environment or a different climate, different zone. And this zone here happens to have a lot of moisture content and some hot summers. We get a lot of Gulf moisture that comes up. So that combined with temperature, we want to air conditioning just kicked on. It happens often here when we tape here, but it's just a reminder to say, hey, how does the dew point affect the home? Has there been any history of water loss in this home? So imagine you get a house that you're looking at. Your agent is really nice, and they know your story to some degree. Whatever you've shared, they understand your budget. They're trying to get you the right fit, and all the things work out. They have their trusted home inspector that they give you, and they come and they do whatever ancillary services on top of what you want done. And you get in the house as quick as possible because you're going to have a baby soon. Maybe you're first-time home buyers. Maybe you've done this before. I don't know. But either way, the process gets rushed a little bit so that you can't really think about your due diligence, ask questions from the right people, get a good network, talk about, hey, what if? What are the other concerns that we might want to address? And then vet the people that you're contracting with, whether that's your realtor, whether that's your home inspector, and anybody else involved in the process. Do you have time to actually vet them? And that's a big part of it. So whenever I see, as an example, if I have the home inspector hat on, which we have an inspection company, if my inspectors see things like, I don't know, efflorescence on the outside of the brick on a home when they walk up to it, that's something to pay attention to. I'm not saying that, we obviously know everything, but it is a indicator that there's been a history of moisture somehow that may or may not affect the interior of that envelope. If we find out, either through the inspection process or from a disclosure end, or somebody just communicates, hey, we got some new windows. Why is my question. And it just happened. It wasn't like it happened a few years ago and they just wanted to save energy and they decided to move the house. But if the windows just got replaced and they are just now selling the house, my question is, why would you do that? So those are, again, red flags for a good inspector. Should be a red flag. So, again, not naming any names here. But with that said, those are just things that we use as filters to look through a certain lens when we're looking at the house, and maybe we go a few steps further in different locations in the house. So if those things didn't happen, because, again, the timeline dictates everything, and we're all excited, and wife's pregnant, all these things, we find out that the paint may not be sticking to the wall, or we got some indicators of some moisture in certain locations. Then we call somebody in to say, hey, we might have an issue here. What you can find is there might be some microbial activity, which, if you have the home inspector hat, that's the verbiage you need to use, unless you're an expert or a trained professional in the environmental industry, and you come in and you actually can speak to certain aspects of mold with more authority. And that's really the differential. One industry has its limitations. Other industries has its limitations. And if you have an environmental company, you should be able to speak to those things in the home inspection industry with more authority. And there should be some separation. Again, it's always Clint Eastwood. It's always Clint Eastwood. You got to know your limitations, all right? So no matter where you're coming from. So, as an example, if there was a history of moisture due to windows being replaced or doors being fixed on the exterior of an envelope for any length of time, once you get past, 2 to 3 days, things are starting to grow, on drywall especially. So depending on a lot of factors, we have to be aware of that. Now, if you've got efflorescence on the outside of brick, something's been happening for a while. And typically the winters are pulling things out. That's where those salts can come out, typically during that season. And because it's drier outside in the winter, right? There's less relative humidity as opposed to the summer when it's trying to draw it in. So thermodynamics, right? So, again, just an indicator. If I see that, I should be moisture mapping that wall a lot, or at least an area, to at least be representative if I'm doing an inspection. And if I know the windows have been replaced, that's another, again, red flag. I got to be moisture mapping something. And maybe I would say, hey, we probably ought to do some environmental testing with somebody that is qualified to do so and certified in what they're doing. So that's how this can happen. So, as an example, if none of those things happen, if nothing is found on the front end, because, again, either people not knowing their limitations because they're speaking to things that they shouldn't speak to because they're not qualified to speak to that, or B, there's a lack of integrity from not disclosing things, or C, there's inspection companies out there that just do a lot of volume and maybe the quality control isn't there, and you don't have as thorough of a job. You can have everybody in that process drop the ball from a disclosure standpoint, from a realtor standpoint, depending on what the incentive is, which is always money at some point. But if you get a good realtor They're going to care about your condition. They're going to make sure that you're getting a good house, and they're going to safeguard themselves as well as you from, liability, and as well as you from protection from getting something that you don't want. And then same on the inspection end. If the inspection, again, liability, they the I've said this before, the inspection industry, the home inspectors kind of have a raw deal, I think, but out of that whole transaction, everybody's trying to get to the finish line to get their money, right? Everybody should be getting people a good home. But when money is the incentive, it's no different than a lobbyist for any other organization. There's a conflict of interest to some degree to say, hey, what's the incentive here? The incentive should always be, let's get these people in a safe, secure, healthy home. All right? And if that gets compromised so that we get to the finish line quicker without any hiccups, I just think that's problematic. And we start to trade off levels of integrity for different things. So that's just my philosophy. So, and it doesn't mean, again, that every house should be absolutely perfect because, if there's any age to any home, you're going to have things. But there's a difference between normal wear and tear, normal conditions on the home that just need improvements from a health standpoint and cleaning ducts and, taking care of a few water issues that ended up being no big deal, and having something that's been sustained for any length of time and never dealt with appropriately to get to the root of the issue because of the health risks that are associated with that for the inhabitants. So what can happen can be disastrous in some cases. And I don't say that to sensationalize things or scare anybody, because that's rare, at least what we see. But it can happen. So I would just say, I would caution you all to say, A, if it's a real estate transaction, vet everybody. B, if you are in a hurry, take a step back. Time is your, if you can give intention to it and take a step back from the emotional side of it, make sure that you're, not, it doesn't mean that you have to put everybody through the ringer here, because you have to have some level of trust, but don't do it blindly. Make sure that you there's going to be a certain amount of risk on everybody's part, but make sure you get the right people. Okay. And then make sure it's what you want. And so it's just a delicate balance between all those tensions. Then the other, I would just say, when you get on the back end, have your awareness up. Make sure that you're paying attention to things. If you didn't go through those two things really well, look and see what you got. Know what you're breathing. It's just like you got to know what you're eating or know what you're drinking, which we say all the time. Know what you're breathing. So whether you just want improvement or you just want things checked out. So I would encourage you to do those things. The other side of this coin is that you've been in this house and you want to start doing improvements, and you find things, or your contractor finds things that aren't favorable to your breathing conditions. I would say stop what you're doing. I, again, had another scenario this week where we've had two instances that were pretty big deals. And in this case, which happens all the time, whether it's a direct water loss and you've got a restoration company coming in trying to take care of something that's been sustained for a long time, wrong application. It's got to be a certified remediator. You need to have it evaluated on the front end by an environmental guy to come in and map that out, both from a moisture standpoint, any other environmental concerns, look at how the airflow is working, look at the HVAC, possibly do some testing to help just get a baseline of what is obvious. And then at least say, okay, if something's obvious there, and have a really good inspection from an environmental standpoint, we can say, all right, here are some of the factors that are going to play into this. And if we have any hits on some things that shouldn't be there or concentration levels, then we need to get the remediator involved. And if somebody finds something that they uncover, we can define it define that scope of work at least to a certain point, so the remediator knows what they're getting into at some level before any demo starts, so that we can start with containment in the right locations, and affected areas can be dealt with from a cleaning standpoint or remediation standpoint on surfaces as well. So that's how it should work. So if you find something or your contractor finds something, don't let them finish. Everybody wants to get paid for the day, which I get. But in this particular case, what has happened is they keep doing their job. They remove all the material through the house. Even if they take preventative measures, they're not trained in those preventative measures specifically, because we're dealing with microscopic things. And this is even if you're not sensitized to it, right? I'm just saying for like normal conditions and people with average health, right? It's still a problem. And so you want to isolate those things. You want to deal with those things effectively by people that know what they're doing, because you can spread it through the whole house and contaminate the whole house. And in this particular case, I usually tell people not to get back in the house, which I rarely would say that. Or I would advise them. I don't tell them what to do. It's their choice. But, you got to be careful with that sort of thing, because, I'm not a doctor. I don't know exactly how their bodies are going to react to things. I just know the potentials are there. And I make them aware of those potentials and say, you might consider doing this just to be safe, and consult with your doctor always. And that way, doctors can take care of the body. We can take care of the house. And as soon as it clears and it passes a certain level of clearance for the areas that are being remediated, great. We just go to the next level. Hopefully there's nothing else trapped somewhere. But at least we know from national standards and guidelines, this should be safe for you to come into. So that's kind of how it should work. Again, this is just, tagging on to our last interview here where we had a wonderful testimony. So I would encourage you to look at that episode. But just an overall perspective, both from a real estate end and, from a improvement end, if somebody's going to do any kind of remodeling, whether it was on the backside of a real estate transaction or not, those scenarios really can complicate things and be really uncomfortable for people. So I would encourage you to, again, do your due diligence, okay? Hopefully all that helps. This is a short one, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.